Helicopter blades beat the humid morning air above Saigon, chopping through a sky stained with smoke. Beneath them, on a cramped rooftop, a line of people presses toward a ladder, men in suits. Women clutching children, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear. U.S. Marines shout over the roar of the rotors, pushing people down, forcing them to duck as a helicopter hovers just meters away, its landing skids barely kissing the concrete. Down the road, the ground shakes. At Tan Son Nhut Air Base, columns of black smoke rise from burning jets. The runway is cratered, littered with twisted metal and shattered glass. ARVN soldiers fire in short, panicked bursts toward the perimeter, their helmets low, faces streaked with sweat and dust. As incoming shells thud closer and closer, radios crackle with half-broken orders. Calls for ammo, for medevac, for someone, anyone, to hold the line. And beyond the city's edge, another sound rolls in, low, mechanical, relentless. A column of North Vietnamese tanks crawls toward the center of Saigon along an almost empty boulevard. Their tracks grind over abandoned cars and barricades. Flags whip in the hot wind. A few civilians watch from doorways and shattered windows, unsure whether to hide or simply stand and witness the end. On the streets below the embassy, thousands pack the sidewalks and alleys, pressing against locked gates, waving documents, photos, anything that might get them inside. ARVN units are disintegrating. Refugees clog the roads out of the city, only to find there is nowhere left to run. On the morning of April 30th, 1975, Saigon is running out of time. How did the war that consumed Vietnam for 20 years end in just a few days of collapse? Chaos and surrender? And what really happened in the final battle for Saigon? To understand those final hours in Saigon, we have to go back, 2 years earlier, to a moment that looked like peace. In January 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed. American combat troops began to leave Vietnam. For many watching on television in the United States, the war seemed to be ending. But on the ground, the reality was very different. North Vietnamese units were allowed to remain in the south. The guns fell quieter in some places, but they never fully went silent. The land was still divided. The armies were still facing each other across that invisible line. In Saigon, the Republic of Vietnam survived, but it survived on life support. The government depended heavily on U.S. aid. As that aid was cut back, the economy buckled, prices soared, fuel ran short, and the black market thrived. Corruption hollowed out what was left of public trust. ARVN soldiers went months with poor supplies and little faith that anyone in Saigon or Washington really knew how to win this war anymore. Meanwhile, in the north, the pause was not wasted. Hanoi rearmed and reorganized. New tanks, artillery, and trucks flowed down the supply lines. Divisions rested, trained, and prepared for one last, decisive offensive. The war had not ended. It had simply moved into its final act. In early 1975, that act began. The first blow landed in the Central Highlands, Ban Mi Thuot. The city fell faster than almost anyone expected. Instead of counter-attacking, South Vietnamese forces pulled back. That retreat turned into a chain reaction. Hue, the old imperial capital, was abandoned in a rush. Da Nang, once a major American base, collapsed into chaos as soldiers and civilians fought for space on the last boats and planes out. Along Highway 1, the main road down the coast, refugee columns stretched for miles, families on foot, on overloaded trucks, on anything with wheels, moving south, all of them hoping Saigon would somehow hold. By April, it was clear, this was not a limited offensive. It was a final campaign. North Vietnamese planners called it the Ho Chi Minh Campaign, a coordinated drive on Saigon from multiple directions. Armored columns and infantry divisions pushed in from the north, west, and east. Town after town fell with little resistance. Bridges were seized, airfields overrun, supply depots captured. On April 26th, the outer defenses around Saigon came under heavy attack. Artillery began to pound the city's edges. The capital was no longer just under pressure. By late April, Saigon was not just a capital under threat. It was a city surrounded. Around Saigon in late April 1975, the war looked like a giant chessboard, except almost all of the pieces were now moving in one direction. On one side were the forces of the North, units of the People's Army of Vietnam and Viet Cong. No longer fighting as scattered guerrillas, but as full-scale conventional armies. Several army corps were closing in, backed by hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles, long lines of trucks, and heavy artillery positioned just outside the city's reach. They weren't probing or testing anymore. They were coming to finish the war. The Ho Chi Minh Campaign wasn't a single arrow on a map. It was 5 assault axes driving in from the west, north, and east, each one aimed at a different weak point in the defenses around Saigon. One thrust moved along the main highways, another pushed through smaller roads and villages. Others targeted key airfields and river crossings. The objective was cold and clear: capture Saigon quickly, prevent a drawn-out urban battle, and force the South Vietnamese government to surrender completely. Facing them was a South Vietnamese army that, on paper, still had men, weapons, and units around the capital. In reality, ARVN was a shadow of what it had once been. Many of its best divisions had been shattered in the highlands and along the central coast. Survivors had fallen back toward Saigon, exhausted, traumatized, and unsure what they were still fighting for. Entire units had melted away on the retreat. Commanders no longer trusted the orders coming from above. Soldiers no longer trusted that anyone would come to rescue them if they stood and fought. Inside Saigon, the political leadership was collapsing just as fast as the front lines. President Nguyen Van Thieu resigned and fled the country, accusing the United States of betrayal. Power passed briefly from one set of hands to another, until finally General Duong Van Minh, a man seen by many as a last, fragile hope for negotiations, became president on April 28. He inherited a title, a collapsing army, and almost no real control. By the time Minh took office, the enemy's tank columns were already on the move. And the Americans? Their combat troops were gone. There would be no Marines landing on the beaches, no new waves of bombers coming to save Saigon. Instead, U.S. planners were working on something else entirely: Operation Frequent Wind. A last-minute evacuation by helicopter. Their mission was no longer to defend the city, it was to get their own people, and as many South Vietnamese allies as possible, out before the final blow fell. On maps and briefing slides, there was still a plan to defend Saigon. On the streets, that plan was already falling apart. April 26, 1975. The first shells land on the outskirts of Saigon just after dawn. They come in low and fast, whistling over rooftops before slamming into fuel depots, road junctions, and outlying bases. The ground jumps, windows shatter, dogs howl in the alleys. For a brief moment, no one is sure if this is a single barrage or the beginning of the end. Then more rounds fall. On the western approaches to the city, ARVN units dig in along key roads and bridges, what's left of battered regiments trying to form a final line. Soldiers crouch behind sandbags and broken concrete, helmets tipped down, rifles resting on trembling hands. Officers shout positions on radios that crackle with static and overlapping voices. Every few minutes, a fresh plume of smoke rises where another shell finds its mark. The civilians caught in between have one instinct: run. Trucks, motorcycles, carts, and bicycles stream toward Saigon from every direction. Families cling to whatever they can carry: bags of clothes, bundles wrapped in blankets, a single suitcase tied to the back of a scooter. A father rides with one child in front and one behind, both of them barefoot, holding on with white-knuckled fingers. No one knows exactly where to go, only that the enemy is behind them. Rumors move faster than any artillery. The Americans are leaving. They've already gone. No, they'll stay. They won't abandon Saigon. In cafes, in markets, in lines at gas stations, the same question keeps surfacing. If the Americans really leave, what happens to us? Blank, underscore, blank. April 27th. The ring tightens another notch. Artillery reaches deeper into the city's edge. Shells hit near Tan Son Nhut, near key intersections, near the last few functioning logistics hubs. ARVN commanders mark enemy positions on maps that are now more empty white space than friendly units. Orders go out to hold at all costs. But everyone knows that all costs has already been paid in the highlands and along the central coast. Some soldiers still fight out of duty, habit, or simple refusal to run again. Others slip away in the confusion, vanish into the crowds, or go home to protect their families. Every position that falls back brings the enemy's guns a little closer. Blank, underscore, blank. April 28th. At Tan Son Nhut Air Base, the war changes from artillery strikes to something far more direct. Shortly after noon, small attack jets appear in the sky, A-37 Dragonflies. Aircraft that once belonged to South Vietnam, now flown by North Vietnamese pilots. They roll in over Tan Son Nhut and drop their bombs. The explosions rip across the runway in a chain of fire and smoke. Jets parked wingtip to wingtip are torn apart, flipped, or set ablaze. Hangars burn, sending columns of black smoke climbing into the sky over Saigon. Fuel dumps erupt in orange fireballs. The air fills with the shriek of metal and the roar of burning aviation fuel. On the ground, personnel scramble for cover, diving into ditches, behind revetments, under vehicles. Sirens wail across the base. ARVN gunners fire blindly into the sky, but the damage is already done. In a single morning, the main air gate of Saigon is crippled. Inside the city, the sound of the bombing carries like a distant thunder. People stop in the streets and look up, shading their eyes against the smoke. For many, Tan Son Nhut is not just a military base, it is the way out. The idea that planes might no longer take off from there turns fear into something colder. Finality. Blank, underscore, blank. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Saigon's leaders argue over what future, if any, is still possible. Inside government buildings, Duong Van Minh and his cabinet sit around long tables, staring at maps that show enemy units on every side of the capital. Some argue that there must be a way to negotiate a coalition government or at least a ceasefire that will spare the city. Others insist that surrender would be a betrayal of every soldier who has died in uniform. But the choices on paper no longer match the reality outside. ARVN commanders call in from collapsing positions, asking for clear orders, reinforcements, air support that no longer exists. Some receive instructions to hold. Others are told to fall back. Still others hear nothing at all. Units move without coordination. Some fight, some retreat, some simply disappear. The government talks in circles while the front lines dissolve. Blank, underscore, blank. April 29th. Saigon wakes to a day that will not end with the same flag flying over the city. On the radio, between music and official announcements, a strange phrase appears in English. The temperature in Saigon is 105 and rising. For most listeners, it's just a sentence that makes no sense. But for those in the American community, it is the pre-arranged code. Operation Frequent Wind has begun. Helicopters begin to land not just at Tan Son Nhut, but on rooftops and inside the walls of the U.S. Embassy. CH-46 and CH-53 helicopters sweep in over the city, skimming low between buildings, flare dispensers popping to confuse any potential missiles. At the embassy, Marines tighten the perimeter and start moving people toward the roof. Outside the embassy compound, the crowd swells by the hour. Hundreds become thousands, South Vietnamese who worked with the Americans, their families, their neighbors, and anyone else who hopes that being close to the embassy might mean a chance to leave. People hold up papers, photographs, ID cards, pleading to be recognized. Children sit on shoulders, crying in the heat. The gates bow under the pressure of the crowd. At Tan Son Nhut, the evacuation is even more dangerous. Helicopters land amid the wreckage of the previous day's attack. Dust and smoke swirling around their rotors. Marines and aircrew rush people aboard as quickly as possible. North Vietnamese rocket and artillery fire still reaches the base. In one of these barrages, the last American casualties of the Vietnam War, U.S. Marines, are killed while trying to hold the perimeter long enough for one more lift. For those already inside the embassy or on a helicopter, every rotor beat is hope, the sound of one more chance to escape before the city falls. For those outside the gates, pressed against the walls, watching helicopters rise and disappear into the smoky sky, every rotor beat is something else. A reminder that time is running out. April 30th, 1975. Before dawn, Saigon is a city holding its breath under fire. Artillery has been landing through the night, dull, distant thuds at first, then sharper blasts as shells fall closer to key junctions and bases. Each explosion flashes orange against the low clouds, followed by the echo rolling through concrete and glass. Flares hang over the outskirts of the city like falling stars, turning the smoke a sickly white. At the U.S. Embassy, the evacuation is still going on in the early hours. Helicopters come and go in a steady rhythm, rotors chopping the darkness, spotlight beams cutting across the rooftop. Inside, shredders and burn barrels work non-stop. Documents, maps, and files are fed into flames. Radios, code machines, and sensitive equipment are smashed or smashed again. Marines move people up narrow stairwells toward the roof, checking names against lists that no longer feel big enough. On nearby streets, ARVN soldiers abandon positions they were told to hold only the day before. Some leave in trucks if they can. Others walk, slinging their rifles loosely over their shoulders, unsure if they're still on duty or already on the run. A few simply pull off their uniforms, jackets, helmets, insignia, and drop them into gutters or stuff them into trash cans, hoping that, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, they will blend into the crowd. As the sky lightens from black to gray, the shelling slows and then stops. For the first time in days, there is an uneasy quiet. Blank, underscore, blank. When morning finally comes, the tanks move in. From the west and north, columns of North Vietnamese armor roll toward the heart of Saigon in broad daylight. T-54 and T-59 tanks, some with infantry riding on top, rumble past burned-out vehicles and hasty barricades that no one is left to man. Their tracks grind over broken pavement and scattered belongings, leaving long gouges in the streets. There is resistance, but only in pockets. A few ARVN units, cut off from command, are refusing to surrender. Fire from alleyways, rooftops, or roadblocks. A burst of machine gun fire here. A rocket-propelled grenade there. A tank stops for a moment, swings its gun, and answers with a single, devastating shot. The skirmish ends as quickly as it began. There is no coordinated defense. No grand last stand. Just scattered sparks, quickly smothered. For civilians, the day feels unreal. Some stay inside, peeking through shutters or cracks in doors, watching the tanks go by. Others line the sidewalks, keeping a careful distance, torn between fear and curiosity. Shopkeepers stand in doorways, hands on the frames, as soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms pass under their signs. Children cling to their parents' legs. In some neighborhoods, people raise white flags, cloths, or rags tied to sticks, signaling that they will not resist. In a city that has heard gunfire for decades, the noise now is different, less chaotic, more controlled. The roar of engines, the clank of tracks, short, sharp bursts of gunfire instead of the constant, rolling thunder of battle. Saigon is falling, but not in a storm of bombs and flames. It is being taken, street by street, building by building, with an almost unnerving calm. Blank, underscore, blank. By mid-morning, the armored columns reach the symbol that matters most, the presidential palace, Din Doc Lap. The wide boulevard leading to the palace gates is strangely open. The trees cast long shadows across the pavement as the lead tank rolls forward. For a moment, it pauses in front of the ornate metal fence, engine idling, then it surges ahead. The tank crashes through the front gate in a shriek of metal, bending the bars inward, tearing them from their hinges. Soldiers leap from the vehicles and fan out across the lawn and up the steps. Cameras, held by North Vietnamese cameramen and foreign journalists, capture the scene that will circle the world. Tanks in front of the palace, flags on their turrets, soldiers swarming the once protected entrance. Inside, there is no firefight. In a conference room, President Duong Van Minh and members of his cabinet sit waiting. Minh has already ordered a ceasefire, instructing ARVN forces to lay down their arms to avoid more bloodshed in the city. Documents lie neatly stacked on the table. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and resignation. North Vietnamese officers enter, wet boots on polished floors, uniforms dusty from the road but weapons ready. There is a brief, tense exchange, then the famous words, reconstructed from those who were there. Minh says, quietly, "We are here to hand over power." The reply is firm, almost cold. "You cannot hand over what you no longer have. You have nothing left to hand over. Your power has already collapsed." In that moment, the political reality catches up with the military one. The Republic of Vietnam, in practice, no longer exists. Blank, underscore, blank. But there is still one thing left to do. Tell the country. Duong Van Minh is taken from the palace to Radio Saigon. The streets on the way are lined not with cheering crowds or raging battles, but with people standing in doorways, sitting on motorbikes, watching in heavy silence as the convoy passes. Inside the radio station, technicians hurriedly patch equipment together. Microphones are tested. The room smells of dust, hot electronics, and nerves. Minh sits down in front of the microphone. Outside, soldiers stand guard in the corridors, boots squeaking on the worn floor. The broadcast begins. In a calm, almost weary voice, Minh announces that the Republic of Vietnam is surrendering unconditionally. He calls on all South Vietnamese forces to stop fighting, to lay down their arms, and to avoid further bloodshed. The words crackle out over radios and loudspeakers across the city and beyond. In homes, cafes, and military posts, people stop what they are doing to listen. ARVN soldiers gathered around transistor radios hear the message and slowly begin to understand that there will be no counterattack. No last-minute rescue, no secret plan. Some weep openly, some stare ahead in shock. Others quietly remove their unit patches, set their rifles down, and walk away. In some places, shots ring out one last time, not at the enemy, but into the air, or in private, desperate acts that will never be recorded. In many other places, there is only silence. With that broadcast, the government of South Vietnam formally ceases to exist. After 3 decades of war in Vietnam, against the French, against each other, and against the largest military power in the world, the conflict that people simply called the American War has reached its final, undeniable end in Saigon. And yet, for all the chaos and bloodshed that came before, the final military takeover of the city is, in many streets and neighborhoods, strangely quiet. No massive urban battle, no days of house-to-house fighting. Just flags changing, uniforms changing, and a sense that history has turned a page in a single morning. After decades of war and a month of collapse, Saigon has fallen. And in much of the city, it falls not with a roar, but with an eerie, unsettling calm. When the shooting stopped, the city did not suddenly feel at peace. It felt emptied. By the afternoon of April 30th, new flags were flying over key buildings. Armed checkpoints appeared at major intersections. Loudspeakers crackled to life on street corners, broadcasting calm, measured instructions from the new authorities. Stay inside. Do not loot. Do not panic. Maintain order. Units of the victorious army fanned out, not just with weapons, But with notebooks, lists, and assignments, the first task was simple: take control of a capital that had just changed hands. Government ministries were occupied, police stations were taken over. Some officers put on new armbands and reported for duty under new commanders. Others quietly disappeared. Files and records, the paper skeleton of the old state, were boxed up or seized. The old emblem of the Republic of Vietnam began to vanish from uniforms, flags, and official documents. The name, Saigon, still hung on street signs and in people's mouths. But everyone understood. This city would soon be known by another name. For South Vietnamese soldiers and officials, the war did not end with the radio broadcast. It ended in lines. In the days and weeks that followed, notices went up instructing former officers, civil servants, and certain professionals to report to local authorities for free education. Many obeyed, believing they would attend short political classes and then return to their families. Some did. Many others were sent to remote camps for months or years to clear land, cut timber, and study new political doctrine behind barbed wire. Wives and children queued outside district offices, clutching bundles of clothes and food, trying to find out where their husbands and fathers had been taken, and for how long. Other soldiers made a different choice. They burned uniforms, hid weapons, and tried to blend into the civilian population. A few slipped into the jungle again, this time not as part of a large army, but in small, scattered groups that would fight on in the shadows for years. For ordinary civilians, the feeling was a mix of relief and fear. The bombardment had stopped. There were no more tanks firing in the streets, no more artillery rounds shaking the windows. Families who had spent nights crouched in hallways or crowded into basements could finally step outside without flinching at every loud noise. But with that relief came new questions. What would happen to their property? Their jobs? Their children's schools? What would revolution mean, not as a slogan on a banner, but as the rules of daily life? Shops reopened slowly, some with new signs, some with old names hastily painted over. Rice and basic goods were distributed, sometimes freely, sometimes under new ration systems. Prices, rumors, and hopes all fluctuated at the same time. For some, the end of the war meant a real chance at stability for the first time in decades. For others, it meant the beginning of quiet, gnawing uncertainty. For the Americans and their closest allies, the end had already taken the shape of a helicopter silhouette. In the last days of April, more than 7,000 people, American citizens and selected South Vietnamese, had been lifted out by helicopter. Many more had left earlier by plane or ship. Tens of thousands of South Vietnamese who had worked with the U.S. found themselves on foreign bases or in refugee camps, carrying whatever they could fit into a small bag, staring at maps of countries they had never seen before. Those who did not make it out faced hard choices: stay and adapt, hide and hope, or look to the sea. In the months and years that followed, overloaded boats would slip out along the coast under cover of darkness, packed with families willing to risk storms, pirates, and drowning rather than accept the future they saw ahead. For them, the war did not end at the palace gates, it bled into the waves. So April 30th brought many endings, but not the same ending for everyone. For the victors marching into the city, it was a day of triumph and reunification. For many in the South, it was a day of loss, of exile begun or exile feared. And for those who had fought on all sides, it was the moment when the guns finally fell silent. But the consequences of what had been done, and what had been lost, were only beginning to unfold. Decades later, the streets of Saigon, now officially Ho Chi Minh City, wake up like any other modern city. Scooters swarm past the old presidential palace, now a museum. Office workers hurry through the same gates where tanks once crashed through. Children play in parks that used to sit inside artillery range. For many of them, April 30th is just a date on the calendar, a red square marking a holiday. For others, it is anything but just a date. In Vietnam, it is celebrated as Ngay Phong Minh Nam, the day the South was liberated. The day the country was finally reunified after generations of war. There are parades, flags, loudspeakers playing revolutionary songs. Veterans pin old medals onto clean shirts and gather at monuments, remembering friends who never came home, battles that shaped the map, and the long road that led to that morning in 1975. For many Vietnamese abroad, it is remembered as Black April, the fall of Saigon. A day of airports and docks and rooftops, of rushed goodbyes and crowded boats. They remember what they lost: a city, a country, a way of life, in community centers and small memorials halfway around the world. They light candles and look at faded photographs, still asking themselves whether they chose the right moment to leave, or whether they should have left at all. And for American veterans, April 30th is a marker that still stings. The helicopters lifting off from the embassy rooftop, the last Marines leaving the gate, the image of a war that ended not with victory, but with evacuation. Some see betrayal, others see inevitability, almost all of them still see faces, names, and places they cannot forget.
Just like I remember it.
One day,
Doesn't
3
seem that
names,
long ago sometimes.
countless memories.
Hard to
So
forget
what,
those days.
exactly, was the Battle of Saigon? Was it the long-awaited liberation of a divided country? Was it the collapse of a state and the beginning of exile for millions? Was it proof that even a superpower has limits, or that no foreign power can decide the fate of Vietnam forever? Or was it all of those things at once? We'd like to hear how you see it. If your family lived through those days, if you served on any side of this conflict, or if you've only known it through stories and photos, tell us in the comments. Right finger, do you think of April 30th as liberation, as a fall, or as something in between? Right finger looking back, do you believe this war could have ended any other way? Stories like this are too complex, and too human, to be reduced to a single slogan or a single flag. If you believe these stories should not be forgotten, consider subscribing to Vietnam War Footage, and turning on notifications, so you don't miss the next episodes in this series. In our next film, we're going to rewind 7 years, to the shock that shook both Vietnam and America. Tet Offensive 1968, the attacks that turned the war inside out. The fall of Saigon was the final chapter. To understand why it ended that way, we have to go back to the moment when many people first realized the war was already unwinnable.